So he's here to tell you about decision making in early stage startups. So Gaurav, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kwok Hao. I appreciate the kind introduction. Uh, so as Kwok Hao mentioned, I'm here to tell you about decision making in early stage startups. Now, as a business school students, you must have heard a lot about big companies and what it's like to make decisions under those conditions when you have that kind of flexibility and resources available to you. I'm here to explain to you what it's like to make that decision when that same company was a tiny little startup with just a couple of people working in it, and every decision could mean the difference between surviving another month or having to shut down operations and go back to your crappy day job. So I'm Dr. Gaurav Manek. I got my PhD in AI and machine learning from Carnegie Mellon. And since then, I have started 2 startups, the second of which is called Ocellivision, where we do breast cancer surgery microscopes. And I'm still working on that right now. My opinions here are my own, not my employers. So please don't write to them and tell them I said something. And my goal here today is to give you a sense of what it's like to make decisions under the extreme resource constraints of an early stage startup. Don't bother taking any notes. I'm going to promise you up front, the slides will be available online, as will an audio recording of today's entire lecture. So just sit down and just engage with the material and try to answer the questions as I ask them to you. The other caveat I have to offer you is that this is an abridged version of a much longer lecture, so I can't talk about AI and software specifically as startups because we're under quite some limited time today. But yeah, maybe you'll have a chance to hear the full version later on. So starting up a company is like staring into the abyss and eating glass. This is Elon Musk's quote. It is quite true. And one of the reasons it is true is because startups tend to fail a lot. Something like 20% of startups will fail after about a year. And that goes all the way up to 65% failing in about 10 years. These numbers don't include, by the way, startups that didn't even last the first year. So startups tend to just fail. And they tend to fail for these common reasons. Most commonly, you run out of money, that's it. You close operations. You can't pay anybody. You have no ability to act in the world without money. That's it. Lack of market need, where you try to solve a problem where no one actually needs you to solve. Then after that, competition, someone does the same job better than you, you can't quite charge for what you want to charge for, or someone slaps you with a lawsuit and that's the end of that. So today we are going to go through the stages of starting up, and we're going to examine what are the challenges in each of these stages and how these might lead your company to fail. Now, the stages themselves are not unique. A lot of people have come up with their own versions of these, but we're just going to use this particular version for today because it's the version that I'm most familiar with. Now, all startups care about one particular, early stage startups care about one particular line, which is when do I start making money? Right? When do I make my first sale? When is the first time I can go to someone and say, here's your box now, give me cash for it? And that's called the revenue generating phase or line. Before that, you need to spend money building your product, building your service, building whatever it is that you're building with the promise that you'll make money in the future, but without any such guarantee. And that's called the funding gap. This is the existential threat for all startups that all early stage startups face. And in this case, you have to do 2 things. You have to manage your runway and control your burn rate. Would anyone like to give me or guess what either burn rate or runway are in this context? Any takers? I brought candy.
Sorry, I bribed them already with food.
Yeah, unfortunately. Okay, come on. Anyone? You look like you have an answer over there. No, don't turn around. Go on. Guess. Yes. Go on. Give me a guess. Anyone? Come on. Yes.
You can ask your family for fund.
No. What does burn rate and runway mean?
Runway, just how to manage your fund.
Exactly. So runway is how many? Thank you. Candy for you. The runway is the number of months worth of funding you have left at your current spend rate that you can sustain before you have to close up operations. And your burn rate is how much you're spending per month in dollars per month. Every early stage startup CEO will know these two numbers at the back of their head, and it'll be slowly digging into the back of their skull, reminding them, no, I got to bring in more money, I got to bring in more business, I got to do something to extend that runway and to control my burn rate. So now the question becomes, how do you raise the money to do this? So you can see roughly, based on the growth stage of your startup, where that money has come from. At the very beginning, there is the pre-seed or the FFF stage. FFF stands for friends, family, like you mentioned, and fools. The only people who are foolish enough to give money to an early stage startup, which is most likely going to fail, that's where you get money from at the very start, when you're prototyping. This is before you make any money, by the way. Then, once you have a good prototype, you can then go to someone who's a commercial investor in the area that you're trying to find or get some traction in, and they'll provide you with seed funding, potentially. Then after that, Series A, Series B, so on and so forth, until you make a general sale of your shares in an initial public offering or IPO. The question you have to ask is, what do you have to give these people in exchange for that? Typically, it's a chunk of your company, some share in the future profits of your company. And how much of these shares do you have to give? How much of this equity is what we call it, you have to give up. We'll get into that in a second. But first, small companies, early stage companies tend to be very small because, again, control your burn rate. You can't afford to hire 100 engineers if you've only raised a tiny amount of money. You have to only make whatever it is work with only a few people. And that tends to get bigger and bigger as your company becomes more and more mature. So the amount of equity you give up for the pre-seed stage can be typically about 10%. People can ask more, and some people do give more away, but that tends to make future investors suspicious. And so they may not be willing to invest in your company if you've already given, say, 30% of it away to a pre-seed investor. The problem with this, you'll notice, is that first you have 90% left, then you have, 72% left, then you have cut another quarter of that off, and again and again and again. So you can very, very easily dilute your share to nothing. Like, I know a guy who had to raise Series H investment. That's, I think, 8, excuse me. And at that point, he was left with nothing. He had like about a 1% of his company ownership, and that was just not worth enough to make it worthwhile for him. You can also accidentally agree to innocuous terms early on that tend to be very bad later. A common trap, particularly for technology CEOs, is that you may accidentally give up preferred shares to an investor. That means if the company has to be liquidated, they get their money back, all their money back, before you see a single cent. And it's very easy to agree to that early on, only to later discover when your company folds up that, you've just earned literally nothing from 4 years of your life. And finally, when it comes to looking at the market as a whole, your investors almost always know more about the market as a whole than you. They may know more about your own company, but your investors know more about the market as a whole because they get to see confidential pitches from all your competitors. Every company offering a similar product or version or service to whatever you're doing, they get to see the inside workings of those companies as part of their investment activities, and you don't. So be careful. So now let's go down to one of the hardest things I had to learn when I started working when I started doing startups of my own, which are the different filters, the great filters you have to pass at every stage of development of your company. It begins with an idea. Now, this might sound incredibly obvious to you, but you have to build a product that solves a problem for people that people want to give you money for. A lot of people make the mistake of they build something that they want to build and then they don't realize it doesn't actually solve anyone else's problem. We'll get into a really cool example of this later on, but essentially, you have to get the idea right, and then you have to find someone who actually pays. There is a big gap between building an idea that someone may pay you money for and actually getting someone to pay you for the solution. It turns out there can be all kinds of structural issues or misaligned incentives. We'll talk about that in the MAN part later, the money, authority, and need. For determining sales. And finally, the other big filter at this stage is that early stage startups are incredibly stressful with typically low pay and long hours, and teams tend to fall apart at this stage. If your founding team survives this, then you have to get on to the product market fit stage. This is where you have to figure out, if I can't just sell one product to one person, can I actually find a product that enough people will buy that will make it worthwhile for me to continue building all this infrastructure and setting up all this business and continuing to work through it. Establishing that your solution is not only a good solution for this one problem, but is the best of all neighboring solutions. So solving all similar problems so that you're not accidentally leaving a giant chunk of money on the table because you're missing one button or one feature or one effect or something. That's called the product market fit stage. And if you get that, then you get in the early growth stage, which is now you have a solution that applies to enough people that you know people are going to be willing to pay for it. How do you actually find these people and make them consistently pay for it? Because so far, all you've been working on are little individual prototypes. You've been stamping out a couple of units or building out your little Labubu doll push carts or whatever you're building in small quantities in your home. Now, how can I actually get a factory to make these for me? How do I, instead of shipping them out from, stacking them on my bedroom floor and shipping them out by sticking labels on it myself, how can I get a warehouse to do this for me? That sort of scaling is difficult. Now, the other thing at this point you discover are your prices. Prices typically, when the go-to-market stage, are either comically low or catastrophically high. You're either charging like a tenth of what you could be for the solution, and it's just so valuable, but you don't realize it yet, or you accidentally set your prices so high that you make whoever you pitch your product to just laugh. Like, there's no possible way I can pay you, $500 for this fruit crusher or something. Yeah, we'll talk about the fruit crusher example in a bit. Once you've figured this out and you've able to consistently sell your one product to one group of customers, now you need to expand. How do I take this one product selling to one group of customers and add another group of customers or another product to the same group of customers? This is called the bowling alley model. We don't talk about this in detail today, but I will recommend in the reading list at the end of this slides a book that talks about this in detail for you. And then finally, once you're a mature company, you now realize that you have to defend your position against a bunch of other mature companies that are all desperately fighting with each other to extract just a little bit more value from the market. And also, you now have to defend yourself against small little scrappy startups like what you used to be 10 years ago that are hopefully are not going to spring up from nowhere and just seize a bunch of your business and cost you a lot of money. And you do all these things under the backdrop of shareholders looking over your shoulder and waiting for you to make a decision that they don't agree with so they can fire you and get someone else to make more shareholder value for them. So there's quite a lot of competition that you have to deal with once we become a big mature company. Okay, now as someone who runs a startup, the question inevitably you get asked is, how can I make money from my startup? I go to all this trouble. I don't just want to pull a salary. I want to build this company and then sell it off. What is my exit plan as a founder of a startup to get out of the startup and turn what I've built so far into a bundle of cash? When you start a startup, inevitably everyone's going to ask you, what is you as a founder? What is your exit plan? The simplest and easiest exit plan for a professional scientist like myself is somebody comes along and says, hey, I love this invention you've made. How about I just pay you a bundle of money and I build out your invention into a product. I do all the hard parts of this. I just pay you a few cents for every unit I sell. And that is the dream, but that doesn't happen. It happens very rarely these days. I wish I could snap my fingers and just sell off my IP and let someone else do the hard work, but that almost never happens these days. The second option you have is that you get hired by a competitor. Now, getting hired by a competitor is not like a benign operation. Basically, what this happens is some bigger company looks at your startup and says, I like what they're doing. I don't want to pay money for the IP or for the startup. I just want to go to the chief engineer, say, here's a salary bigger than you could potentially make and stock options in our big company that cost us very little but are worth a lot of money to this small player. How about I just hire you? And that just kills the startup. That pretty much kills the startup. If the person who invented the core concept just has to leave the company because they're making 3 times as much working for Google or Amazon, and that's it, that kills your startup. You can also get bought out by majority shareholders. This is never done for happy reasons. When I say bought out by majority shareholders, that means you own, say, 20% of the company. A bunch of other people own 80%. They all decide, I really don't like you. You in particular are causing me so much trouble. I could do so much better. I'm going to go and offer you cash to buy out your 20% of the company, to get rid of you, just so that we, the remaining 80%, can run the company so much better. It's never done for happy reasons. But because it is done just often enough to make it relevant, people will include clauses in their contracts. Typically, something called a shotgun clause is included in your company constitution that says that if you want to buy out someone in a hostile manner, you have to first offer to sell them the chunk of the company that you have. Meaning, if someone wants to buy out my 20%, first they have to offer to sell me their 80% at the same price they want to buy out my 20% for. And only if I decline, then they can buy me out at that price. So these shotgun clauses are not uncommon, specifically because this happens when the founding group falls out with each other. Mergers and acquisitions are a big thing. Mergers and acquisitions typically happen once you have a product that sells and a big company looks at you and says, I want that in my portfolio. I want to use that to offset some sort of risk I have, or because it will work well with my other products. So they will come down, they will look at your company, and they will buy up the whole thing, typically fire a bunch of people as part of that, and adopt you into their overall framework. Mergers and these are almost never done for cash, right? You will almost never receive cash. Instead, you'll get something called a stock swap, meaning the big company will give you your company's value in stocks of the big company in exchange for all of your stocks of that company, and then they will fold the company into theirs. That means you don't receive cash, you receive, let's say Microsoft buys you out, you get the value of your company in Microsoft shares. And if you hold a bunch of Microsoft shares, you have to liquidate them to get actual cash out of the deal. And that's your problem. Finally, mergers and acquisitions, dividends and being bought out by private equity. I don't know, has anyone here heard of private equity? Okay, what is private equity? Can you give me an answer? There's a handful of candy in it for you.
Example.
Yes.
I'm not sure, but maybe some companies, they want to get others' money and they have to become maybe published,
exactly right.
And then they will get funded by the investors.
Exactly right. Yeah.
Okay.
Congratulations. Thank you. So what private equity is a bunch of people who take other people's money, go into your, feed it to a bunch of sharks wearing suits, go into your company and strip it for all that it's worth. People will look at your company and say, I think the parts of this company, through things like production facilities, goodwill with customers, all those different assets together, are worth more than the current trading value. So I'm going to buy this company out and run it, try to strip as much value as I can out of the company and turn that back to my shareholders. These companies sometimes ends well, typically ends with your company being burnt up, but you make a lot of money along the way, so that's okay. These things come with take-along. So a company constitution typically has something called take-along and drag-along clauses to facilitate all of this. A take-along clause is that if one of the majority shareholders is selling a chunk of your company off, you have the right to be included in that deal, even if the majority shareholder doesn't want you to be. So let's say I want to sell my 60% stake of the company to some big company elsewhere. These other minority shareholders can come and say, hey, I also want to sell at the same price, and I'm forced to also bring them along with me. Drag-along clauses are the other way. So let's say I want to sell my chunk of 60% to someone else, but you don't want to sell your chunk. I can, as long as I'm the majority shareholder, I can force you to sell the remaining 20 or 30% you have. This is very useful, particularly when you have a private equity coming to your company and say, I want to buy either all of the shares or none of them. And you own 80%, and some snot-nosed person who hasn't worked for your company in 15 years owns 20% of them. And they would just say, no, I don't want to sell it. What are you going to do? That's when you invoke a drag-along clause. You sell your 80%, and you force them to sell their 20% as well. So these things are all baked into the company constitution at the start, and a lot of investors will refuse to do business with you if you don't have an entire stack of relevant clauses in your constitution that they demand. So now I've given you, hopefully, a good idea into what it's like to do an early stage startup. So we're going to move along to some case studies. So I've been going at quite a clip so far, quite a fast pace so far. Does anyone have any questions I can answer before we move on to the case studies? Yep.
Thank you very much for the presentation. In the very early slides, equity in a startup page, you mentioned that there are three main problems faced by the founders. The first one is dilute share to nothing. The second is agree to terms that might be back later, and the third is information disadvantage. So like you say you built two style yourself. So my question is like, as a founder, how did you manage to avoid those problems? And do you have any suggestions for the rest of us doing?
That's a fantastic question. I should clarify, there are more problems than just that. Those are just the three that have stuck out most to me in my experience. The answer I have for you is dumb luck. I got very lucky that I narrowly avoided for my first startup was a software as a service scheduling application. I got very lucky that I just avoided those problems by finding someone who wanted the product and building a product to their specifications that happened to also work for a bunch of other people. So I got very lucky, and that's not necessarily an instructive example to follow. The second startup, the one I'm working in currently, is a cancer biology, cancer microscope startup. And in that case, we've taken almost 6 months of our lives to go and investigate deep in each hospital how they're currently solving the problem and using that to guide our product development. Hopefully that will help us avoid these kinds of pitfalls. Although we are now in the process of learning that as you go into different countries, the standard of care changes. And so the same product that you build for Singapore might work in the US, but might not work in the EU, and may not work for China, that kind of thing. So we're trying to balance all these different factors right now. That's a great question, though. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
I'm not sure if this is a stupid question or not.
No,
But
it's okay. Go for it.
this experience where there's a company and they already have investors and they want to keep investing. However, the founder don't have the resources to keep on investing, and eventually again dilute the share, and then it becomes like 1%, 0.5%. So how do you actually avoid that if you don't have like the resource or the money to put in?
Okay, so it is rare. So thank you. That's a great question. It is rare for founders to also put in cash after the initial stage. So by the time you hit Series A, the founder will almost never put in additional cash, and investors will almost always be providing only cash or maybe some strategic partnerships. So what typically tends to happen is that by the time you get to the founders own a small enough stake in the company, further investors get more and more squirrely. They start thinking, they are trying to figure out if the founder is going to keep working, if they take another few percentage points from the founder, will this let the incentive to keep working? So it gets harder and harder to get more investment. The less investment you have to give, the less equity you have to give even future investors. There is no great solution for this. Sometimes investors will do things like offer you conditional cash payments. So this is something that Tesla very famously has done for Elon Musk, right? Which is, we'll give you a tiny little salary, not very much equity, but if you increase the value of the company to some absurd number, like hundreds of billions of dollars in this 7 years, then we'll give you a giant windfall. And that sort of structure may be deployed, but there's no real good singular answer to that. But you brought up a very important question that people are dealing with every day. Okay, we've got time for one last question. Yes?
I wanted to ask a very simple question. As a founder or entrepreneur, do you think that which is more important? Like you have to know the financial part of everything, and also you have to like have your expertise in the particular area. So which one do you think is more important? Or if I want to be a founder, I have to like learn everything about financial, or is that recommended?
I'm really sorry. I don't have a good answer for you. You have to learn everything. You have no choice but to learn everything. So as a founder, you have a terminal and final responsibility. There's not a single thing that happens in your company that you are not responsible for in some way. If the toilets flood and you can't get someone to fix it, guess who's going to be on their hands and knees scrubbing the toilets to get it to acceptable for users, right? If something weird happens in the finance world, you have to fix it. If something weird happens in your product, you have to go there and fix it. The one thing you give up as a founder is the ability to say, that's not my problem, that's someone else's problem. Because everything is going to come back to bite you in the end. Yeah. It's a lot of fun though. It's a lot of fun though. We'll get to that in a bit, but that you've very cleverly brought up something we're going to talk about in a few more slides. Okay, great. So now let's get on with some case studies that hopefully you guys will find fascinating. So remember I talked about a juice squeezer, a hypothetical juice squeezer? Someone actually built it. This is called a juicero. It is a pair of metal plates that crush between them a sealed bag that contains diced fruits to produce juice. They're selling this box they tried to sell the box for $400 US, and each pack of juices for $5 to $7. For context, in America, you can go to Walmart and buy a juicing machine for $15.99 one $15.99, and a bag of frozen fruit for about $1.50, maybe $2. This is absurd. Someone's trying to charge more than 10 times the value for what this product can do. On top of that, if the juice pack was expired, even if it was perfectly edible, if it was expired by whatever arbitrary date they put on the packaging, it would refuse to squeeze it for you. What ended up killing this company is someone on YouTube was showing off a video of them crushing the bag with their hands, cutting the end off and dispensing into a glass. And that's finally killed the company. Would anyone like to guess what was the valuation of this company, or what was the investment in this company when that video came out and killed it off, stone dead? Any guess? Come on. How much money did people? Yes?
300 million.
That's actually a pretty good guess. They raised $120 million and had a valuation. Oh yeah, feel free to share with others then. Yeah, they raised $120 million. Investors in Silicon Valley put $120 million of people's money into this company, only for it to all vanish into the ether. Absurd, right? Crazy. Why would investors do this? And that brings us to one of the most important things to worry about as a founder is what is the psychology of the investor? What are they looking for when they give you money? So investors are looking for, would anyone get a guess? What are investors looking for? Exactly, yes, perfect. I'll chuck you some candy. Okay, so what basically they get is catch. So what basically they do is they have their own clients, right? People will come to them and say, here, I have $100 million. How much can you grow it? To which they'll make a promise. Typically, I can give you 5% per annum, but I must hold your money for 7 years, or 7% per annum, I must hold your money for 7 years. Meaning you give me $100 million today, I will invest it in potentially hundreds or potentially dozens of companies. At the end of 7 years, I will give you back $149 million, and whatever extra I make on top of that, I as the investor get to keep. That's broadly speaking the contract between an investor and the people they are raising money from. They almost always have a 7-year pool of money, and they have multiple of these 7-year pools running simultaneously. So they might have one today, one 2 years from now, one 2 years from then, so on and so forth. So this is similar to what a startup founder does, which is you raise a bunch of money and then you turn that into a profit for the people you raised it from, but at a much, much larger scale. Importantly, they have a very, very fine deadline at the end of these 7 years that they must provide the money for. And this puts a lot of pressure on investors to choose. Investors would love to be able to say, oh, let's wait another 2 years until you have removed this risk or you've grown enough that I can be more confident in investing in you. But if they do that, they have to make the 7% per annum for those 2 years somehow through some other investment. So this is the pressure behind an investor, that investor has the back of their head, saying, I have to provide a 7% return this year. I have to do it by making investments now. That's the pressure they have in the back of their head. The other thing is that investors almost always specialize in a particular stage of starting up. That means a pre-seed or seed stage investor will give you money when you enter your seed stage and will not hold on to your shares for 15 years until you have an IPO or something. Almost always, they will sell their share on to a Series A investor. And the same story goes for Series A investor. They will almost always invest in a Series A company, paying off the seed stage investor to take over their share. And then when a Series B investor comes along, they will sell off their share to the Series B investor. So this means they're all specializing in a particular range of time for a startup. Anyone would like to guess why? I'll give you a clue. We talked about the great filters earlier. Anyone? Go on, give it a guess. Say again? Exactly, yeah. So the risks are different at each stage. Can you pass it? Yes, thank you. So the risks are different at each stage of development, and they can make a better return overall if they specialize in a particular kind of risk or type of risk. So for the same reason, you'll find investors who only specialize in biotech, or only specialize in food, or only specialize in Pokemon cards or something, or children's games is a big category for investors. For the same reason, they'll only specialize in pre-seed, seed stage, Series A, Series B, or institutional investors who only specialize in IPO, post-IPO companies. That sort of a thing. Investors will know the market better than you, but you know your company better than them. And because of that, they will go very deep into your books before committing to give you any money. We call this due diligence, and it's a way to avoid that sort of exploitation that might happen if you know a secret about your company that they don't. Here's an example of a big company that was one of the biggest of its time that failed. So you know how you can order Red Mart and get groceries delivered to your dorm room or your home? In exactly the same way, there was a company called Webvan in 1999. This is when the internet was still like mostly dial-up in Singapore, I think. I was a kid in 99. Yeah, it was mostly dial-up at the time, right? And it folded during the 2001 dot-com bubble. It folded despite raising $400 million from VCs and just a little bit less than that in an IPO. They went bankrupt for a very interesting reason. The idea was solid. It works extremely well today. But what they didn't quite realize at the time is that your grocery business all grocery businesses have a very, very small profit margin. Would you like to guess how much of revenue every year is profit for a grocery company? So someone just shout out a percentage number.
20.
No, much lower. Someone else, come on.
8.
Lower.
Lower.
Sorry? 4 to 5? No, lower.
1.5.
Yeah, that's a good guess. The average is 1.7, but between 1 and 3%. That means for every dollar you sell, good catch. For every dollar you sell, you only make about 1.7 cents or less. And when you do that, and at the same time you try to build giant robotics facilities to serve up customers, and you have to hire a bunch of drivers, and your customers are not used to buying groceries online, no one would buy anything online in 1999. Right? eBay was brand new at the time. It was still seen as kind of a scammy website. No one trusts any of these things. And that's why they went bankrupt. They tried to do this a little bit too early, a little bit too hard, and it came back to bite them. Okay, so now we've gone through the idea, we've gone through early customers acquisition. Let's talk about money, authority, and need. So I learned this concept from this guy named Raju Bhupati Raju, who is such a good salesman working in enterprise sales that if you met him on the street, he could sell you your own shoes while you were wearing them. This guy's genuinely scary. And I had the good fortune of meeting him and having him teach me the basic concept of enterprise sales, which is there is the money, the person who has the cash, the person who has the authority to spend that cash, and the person who has the need. And the existence of a corporate hierarchy is designed specifically to divide up the money, the authority, and the need for any decision making. Once you have two people in your company, that's it. The money, the authority, and the need have all been split up in some sense along these two people. This means that anytime you sell a product, you must sell that product in different ways to different people. The classic example of it is this. Let's say I want to sell a piece of candy sitting next to the checkout counter in a grocery store. And I see a mom and a young kid over there. Who do you think is the customer? The kid. The kid's going to have the need in this case, right? Who has the money and the authority? The mom, exactly. So when you sell it to the kid, look, it's shiny, it's pink, it's going to taste great, it's going to be full of sugar. My goodness, you must get it. How do you sell this to the parent? No, of course not. Candy is terrible for you. Go on.
It's cheap, but it will make your children happy.
Exactly, yeah, it'll make your children happy. It'll make your child who's crying for something to do, who's bored out of their skull, and make them stop crying for a little bit. That's kind of the way that you split this up. So let's look at this in my personal area, which is biomedical devices. Let's say we have a surgical imaging system that during brain surgery, as the brain shifts around, it can keep track of where the tumor used to be. So you know where to cut, and so you spare potentially useful brain tissue. I mean, I hear it's quite useful in some places at least. The money, I should have asked you guys to guess, to give me a suggestion, right? So the money obviously comes from a department budget somewhere, typically in this case, the surgery department, although sometimes neurology would pay for this. And it's considered a capital expenditure item, and there's a threshold for the price. So anyone knows what capital and operational expenses are? Anyone wants to guess? CapEx and OpEx. Yes. Yes.
And
Yep.
operational the variable cost that you use for your operations.
Exactly right. So a capex is a piece of equipment that's going to survive more than one accounting period. An operational expense is something you have to buy now, to pay now, to consume in giving a service or your good. So in this case, if you have gloves, they're considered operational expense because you buy them now, you use them, you throw them away. That's it. You've used them, you've taken all the benefit you can from them. A laptop is a capital expense because you buy it now, you use it now, you use it next year, use it the year after, and then you finally get rid of it. That's sort of a structure. So these capital expenses are typically have purchase thresholds. In a hospital, this is especially true in a hospital, in most companies. So if it's under 250K, the CFO needs to approve it. If it's under, let's say 90K, then the department head can approve it without having to go to the CFO. Why is this important for you? If you're a startup building a device, why is this important for you? Anyone? You look like you have an answer as well.
I didn't know your
Oh, okay. Why is it important that you know the threshold of purchase, that the amount of money you charge for your product? Why is it important that you carefully calibrate it? Yep.
Like you must like under the budget, otherwise, no matter how perfect your product is, it won't.
Exactly. Yeah. So in this case, okay. So in this case, what happens is that if your product costs a certain amount of money, the more it costs, the more people have to approve it. If it's $50, then a doctor can just sign for it and say, I'll pay you. The hospital will pay you $50 for this device. I can use it. If it's $90,000, the department head needs to get approval. If it's $250,000, the doctor, the department head, and the CFO. If it's like $500,000, then the CFO and the CEO. If it's $1 million, the CFO, CEO, and the board. So each time you increase the price beyond a certain threshold, you wind up getting more and more people to approve it. Now, this is very important for you to know, because if you set your price of your product at $249K, you can get the CFO to sign for it. $251K, the CEO has to sign for it. And those $2,000 are not worth the amount of extra trouble and friction it takes into making the deal happen. So the authority in this case is whoever the chief of surgery is, potentially the purchasing committee, and if you have any sort of support contract, which, spoiler alert, you want to have a support contract. It's basically free money. You need to get those departments to buy in, and the need comes from the actual neurosurgeon doing the surgery, and potentially from the hospital compliance team, whose job is to guarantee that you're doing the surgery correctly every time. Okay. So here's a quick question for you, right? Anyone knows what SaaS is? Yes?
Software as a service.
Correct. What does that mean?
It basically means that your product uses the software and anything that's related to tech to solve a particular problem.
Exactly, right? It means that you are giving people access to a software. Good, you can share with someone if you don't want it. Yeah, it means that you're giving someone access to some software that you've written, and that is your product. Why do investors like software as a service? Someone else, please. Guess. Give me a guess. What is the next challenge? So far we've talked about go-to-market. We're now at the early growth and growth stages. What does software as a service offer you in terms of growth? Go for it.
Scale.
Exactly, yes. Because it's software, you can just scale it. If you write software following modern software development practices, you can just pay Amazon Web Services more money and they will just make it work better and make it scale better. That's it. Because the scale is almost free, the investors absolutely adore this sort of structure. Okay, let's move one stage on from that. Now, maturity. Once you're a mature company, what are the biggest threats to you? There's two big threats, right? One is other big companies and the other is? Anyone? Or small startups in this case, right? So cheaper options, yes, but small startups that come in and change the way the technology works, or have a different product that you completely missed, that you should have caught when you were at a smaller stage company, or when you're a big stage company, you should have caught these, but you got missed. There are thousands of examples of these, right? How Google had their entire search empire get dethroned because OpenAI has an AI that just answers your question for you rather than gives you a bunch of links to look at. Yahoo themselves, with the original big search conglomerate, they got disrupted by Google because they had a terrible product and Google found a better way to do page ranking. In turn, Blockbuster got famously bushwhacked by Netflix. Kodak invented the first digital camera and then just left it in a lab somewhere and didn't think about it until they got completely ruined by the entire digital photography industry. And there are thousands and thousands and thousands of these examples all over the place. So incumbents tend to get disrupted a lot. And a lot of the effort and time that incumbents put in place is avoiding being disrupted by smaller companies. Yeah, and the way they do this is they invest in a bunch of R&D to build up the competition in-house rather than have someone else build up the competition. Or M&A, where they look at companies that look promising, swoop in, and just buy them out while they are still small. Does anyone know the story between Google and Yahoo? That Google tried to sell themselves to Yahoo at one point. Anyone know how much it was for? I think the first time it was $400 million. Second time was $3 billion. Absolute steal, right? For a what's the thing about it? Almost $1 trillion company at times. Absolute cheap steal. Yahoo would have done so much better if they just bought Google and stopped doing whatever they were doing and just let Google rise. But instead, Yahoo is now a failing company and Google is the king for now. Okay, the other big threat in a mature company are other big mature companies. Does anyone know what CAGR is? Yes?
Compound annual growth rate.
Exactly, what does that mean?
It means the rate at which your company, if I'm not wrong,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, go for it.
Revenue or the profit increases year over year.
Okay, that's a very good definition. Almost right, you got it, the spirit there. What it is the compound annual growth rate, exactly right, of the industry as a whole, typically, and of your company's revenue within that. So I want you to imagine for a moment that you are a mature company competing with a couple of other mature companies in your particular pond, right? All of you are constantly fighting for space in this pond. And there's only two ways you can get more share. One of which is the pond as a whole grows, and the rate at which it's growing is CAGR. And the second of which is you take someone else's share of their pond. But you make a better product, you make a better service, a discount, something you come up with, so that what business used to go to M1 now goes to Singtel, something like that. There's only two ways you can grow, right? Either at the expense of someone else or by growing your industry as a whole. So every mature company is constantly locked in this death match with other big companies in the area, trying to maximize their own value, either by growing better than CAGR, either by stealing someone else's market share or by expanding the market as a whole. And the way they judge this is by looking their growth rate compared to the CAGR of the entire industry. Every big company is obsessed with this. You will find like senior executives in, for example, Leica will sit down every 3 months, look at the best estimates they have for their own business and everyone else's business in the last 3 months and say, what can we change today so our next 3-month forecast looks better? And they'll do this again and again and again. It's one of the highest stress parts of being in the senior leadership of a big company. Okay, in summary, now before I get to a summary of what we've talked about today, does anyone have any questions about the case studies we've looked at? Go on, any questions? Okay. So in broad strokes, in summary of everything we've talked about today, when you're working in a startup, you must always be exploiting some sort of comparative advantage. You must know something or be able to do something that none of the big established companies can do, and you must have a way to protect this. Sometimes you can protect it through IP laws. For some countries that tends to work. For some areas like biotech, it tends to work reasonably well. Or you need to just keep your advantages secret, right? If you are a software as a service company, you can just keep your code private somewhere, and unless someone absconds your company with all of your code, you should be generally safe, maybe, if you're lucky. You also need to talk to as many people as possible, especially customers. As a small startup, you are at an information disadvantage vis-a-vis what is happening in the rest of the market. Talk to a lot of people, see what they say that agrees, see what they say that disagrees. And what you'll often realize is that what people are saying and what people are doing tends to differ, and they don't even realize that it differs in practice. So that's when you have to observe your customers solving their problem, observe it with your product and observe it without your product. And your goal is to see how your product makes it better, and how you can tweak your product to further improve their outcomes. Because that's how you're selling your product, right? Is I can solve your problem, you pay me money for it, I watch you solve it, I can make my product better. And that's how you keep up with the competitiveness of your product. When you're working in a big company, remember that every big company you see was once a startup, right? Shopee, billion-dollar valuation, hundreds of millions of dollar valuation, excuse me, was once like 3 guys or 4 guys sitting in a circle on a round napkin saying, I think we can build this. I think we can build this better. Some decisions made as a startup will remain as a company, will remain with the company for the life of the company, especially software architecture. Anyone knows what programming language Facebook uses or Meta uses? Any guesses? Pascal?
I guess Pascal or R.
No, they use PHP. I know, it's a terrible language. But they were stuck with it because they used it for their first prototype, and they just kind of got stuck with it for the life of their product. And so they had to rebuild the language around their product because it's such a terrible choice of first language to build a product in. Regulatory patterns are like this. If you build a medical device, you're handcuffed to the design you make at first. It'll take a lot of money and effort to change that at all. So you can very easily end up stuck with a terrible decision you've made as a big company. I mean, you ask why? Why would anyone do it this way? Oh, because when we were a startup, we did it this way. Business relationships tend to endure for a very long time. If you have a distributor you like or you don't really like, but they don't do such a terrible job that you can fire them, well, you might end up paying them for another 20 years just because it's easier to keep paying them than it is to fire them. And your market position is never about what you are doing, it's about what you and everyone else in the market is doing. So if you wonder why your company is growing, shrinking, don't just look at your own company, look at everyone else in the industry and compare your company's position with their position to see why. As an employee, you are very lucky because you will almost only ever see the growth and mature stages of a company, right? If you are a founding employee, meaning you get as part of a compensation package some share of the company as equity, you might see a go-to-market stage company. As a consultant, you might touch go-to-market stage companies occasionally. Almost always, if you work at Accenture or something, you're going to be working with mature companies or late growth stage companies. As an entrepreneur, though, you get access to a very, very different part of this whole pipeline, which is you get to see the idea and the prototype in the early stages of building something brand new. And that kind of asks the question, right? So after all this, we've talked about so many different ways that startups can fail, all the dangers, all the traps you might fall into. And given that it's going to cost you a lot of time, it's going to cost you a lot of comfort, it's going to cost you a large chunk of your youth. Why? Why do people actually go out and build startups? One of the reasons I've seen over and over again, particularly in the serial entrepreneurs, is that they see something is wrong in the world and it just itches them, that they just want to fix it, that they have, I can think of a way that I can fix this problem, let me go and do it. That sort of itch. It comes with a lot of freedom, right? We've talked a lot about how you are terminally responsible. I think that's the phrase I used earlier, for everything that happens to your company. But with that also comes the dual side, the flip side of that, which is freedom, right? I'm technically supposed to be at work today, but I can be here and giving a lecture, right? No one's going to stop me. That's part of the freedom that comes with being a startup founder. It's also a different kind of challenge. As an employee, there is a well-boxed set of challenges that you're given, usually, and you usually have the ability, your manager will usually assign you tasks or give you some bounds in which to play. As a startup founder, you don't have that luxury. Every day, a new challenge shows up. Everything from marketing, to talking to customers, to looking at regulations, all that is your job. The impact is also very seductive. The idea that if this works well, I can make life so much better for so many people. And finally, at some bizarre level, the responsibility of doing all this, of being the final say or the final word in making this thing succeed or fail, that's also part of the addiction. And it just feels good, right? It's to do something that no one has really managed to pull off before. That's part of the adventure of it. And with that, thank you very much. My goal, thank you. So as I mentioned, I'm currently working in an early stage startup. We're looking to raise funds And one of the things that I find really helps people is if you have a lot of followers on LinkedIn who engage with your stuff. So I have one ask from you today. If you would mind following this link, connecting with me on LinkedIn, and if I post something about my startup, just like liking it. I'd really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll be here to answer any questions with Kwok Hao for a while. Otherwise, Kwok Hao, any words for them?
Great. Yeah, thanks. Once again, thanks to Dr. Gaurav Manek for
Thank you.
this excellent presentation. Usually, when it comes to AI classes, he's the one teaching the AI, and I'm the one, teaching the boring stuff. But today, we're going to swap roles, and he gets to talk about his startup and, the excitement of being a startup founder. Actually, being a professor is not too different. We have to raise money, convince people in different positions, of the merits of our prototype and our product and so on. But yeah, so today we've seen 4 presentations, and as well as Gaurav's. Next week, we'll see the remaining 5, and please remember to complete your attendance for today. And otherwise, thank you, and please enjoy the food.
Thank you.